I was 20 when I got married. Nolan, my son, was born 4 years later, but over the next 15 years, I was controlled, isolated from my family and friends, and was under the unbearable control of my now ex-husband's emotional and physical abuse. Many people would ask later, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you get out of there? And I used to look back and wonder the same thing. Why didn't I? How could I allow this man to do what he was doing to me? But I stayed. There are several reasons for that, and one of the main ones was he threatened to take my son away from me, and I would never see him again. So I stayed. If I ever said I wanted to separate from him or divorce him, the abuse snowballed, and I felt like I had no choice but to protect my son from this man and stay. After many years, physical abuse started. It was about 15 years into the marriage. He was a Marine, and at that point he was a Marine officer. And he would choke me and push me, shove me, hit me. He'd throw drinks at my face, and followed by the glass flying at me. He would keep me up all night interrogating me about things that I never did. And the physical abuse was so random that I lived on the edge, never knowing what was going to happen, and I ended up with multiple migraines a month from him. And at that point, he had me convinced that I was crazy. And I always said when I got away from the situation I always thought domestic violence and abuse is like being in a cult. You're brainwashed to think things that are not really happening. It's their control over you. And he ruined every holiday, and he would yell at us in public, and he would embarrass my son while he was pitching at baseball games. He was just a horrible person, and I didn't know how to get out of the situation. When he started threatening with the phrase, "I'm going to kill you or divorce you," I used to tell him, "Please divorce me because I don't want to die." And Nolan was having a hard time in school. I didn't know what he was going through at the time, and I didn't know how to get out of the situation. And when Nolan was 18, he smartly left home. He told me to leave him, but I didn't know how. So with my son out of the house, I felt like I had a way to get out. He was safe, and I felt better. One day, Nolan came back to the house, and my husband assaulted him in front of us violently, throwing him and trying to punch him, and it was very upsetting. And that day, we didn't call 911 because he had a high security clearance and a good job. We actually work for the same company, and we decided that if he lost his clearance and his job, that we would have worse problems than we had. And I left him that day. I walked out. I finally walked out, and he immediately froze me out of the bank account. He took me off of car insurance. He told me he wouldn't pay the mortgage and that he'd let the house go into foreclosure, and he threatened to have me arrested for driving my own truck because his name was on it. I stayed in a hotel for 2 nights, and after that I went to a friend's job, and I told her what happened, and she took me in for 6 weeks. At the time, I didn't know about Empower House. I didn't know that I needed Empower House. So my friend and her husband and family took me in, and during that time, he agreed to a divorce. He got an attorney and filed for a divorce, and I eventually, he agreed to sell the house, and I got an apartment one day. I finally moved out. I felt good. He was agreeing with everything, and so I moved into an apartment, and the next day I agreed to meet with him back at the marital house to sell the house, to get the divorce going. And that's when it went really bad. I showed up at the house. The realtor wasn't there. I said, "Where's the realtor?" And he said she went back to the office to get paperwork. And he opened the door, and I had kind of the dread in my belly, but I walked in, and he closed the door and locked it and got right up in my face and started screaming at me, and he dragged me down the hallway and said, "We're going to finish this once and for all." Basement door was wide open. I struggled with him to get away, and I did get away. I ran to the back door, and it was locked, so I unlocked one lock, and before I could get the other one unlocked, he grabbed me and threw me over a lamp table onto a couch. And in a minute, he was on top of me, choking me. And he was trying to get me to go down the basement stairs. And I was able to get away from him. I pushed him off of me, crawled back over the couch, over the table, to the back door. I opened the second lock, and the dog came bursting in, and he grabbed me from the front and just picked me up like a rag doll, a few steps, and threw me down the basement stairs. I hit the wall. I was backwards and upside down, going down all the stairs, and he immediately ran down the stairs with his fist cocked back. He was going to finish me, and I started begging him. I said, I don't want a divorce. I'm going to move back home. Don't hit me. And he stopped, but every time I said something wrong, he pulled his fist back, and I was trying to think of what to do. So he ended up sitting down over me, and he eventually, I talked him into thinking that I was going to stay, that I was coming back home. It was just his birthday. I was going to take him out for his birthday. And eventually, I talked my way back upstairs. We went upstairs. He kept me in the house for quite a long time, but I told him that my friend was coming to the house if I didn't go to her house. So he thought somebody was going to come over. And eventually, I got out the back door onto the deck and pretended like everything was good. And then I got into the front yard, and he wanted me to come back in the house, and I said, no, go get, my shirt was all ripped up and bloody, and he wanted me to come back in the house and change it, and I convinced him to get a sweatshirt for me, and he did. And I told him I'd be back like in an hour or two, and we'd go out to dinner, and he let me go. And I ended up getting in my car, going to my friend's house. She wasn't home, and I drove around for quite a while in shock, and finally woke up at the Falmouth Church on that hill coming down towards Route 1, and I thought, I felt the back of my head. I looked in the mirror. I looked horrible. I had bumps on the back of my head. And I looked at the church and I said, I know what to do, God. And so instead of taking a left to go to Mary Washington, I headed to Fort Belvoir. In the emergency room, people took good care of me. I got in there, and an EMT said, we have to call the Stafford Sheriff's Office. And I said, please do, because I haven't been able to. And they told the EMT people to tell her to stop by at the sheriff's office when you get done. And they admitted me at 2 in the morning from internal bleeding, and I was in a hospital room, and I called the sheriff's office and I said, I'm here still. And they said, just come by. And then they called me back a minute later and said, someone's coming to see you. And deputy showed up in the middle of the night and took my statement and took photos, and I sometimes think that maybe I wouldn't have gone to the sheriff's office if he didn't show up. And when I went to court, I had to face my husband to get my protective order, and he was charged with malicious wounding and abduction, looking at 30 years in prison. And I had no idea what was ahead of me in the courts, but I knew that he couldn't get away with his crimes anymore. And the victim witness office, especially Marilyn, has been with me like from the second week. Her whole career has been with me. And I was under such extreme stress and going to court so many times and having to face him. And as Eric said, he was hostile every time. I mean, I remember going in there, and eventually there were like 6 or 8 bailiffs and deputies in the courtroom because he was so hostile. And he had everyone on edge. And so Marilyn said, you need help, you need to go to counseling. And so she said, there's this great place called Rappahannock Council on Domestic Violence, which is now Empower House. And I went to open group first, and for 2 months I didn't say anything. And then after 2 months I started talking, and I haven't stopped. So they've helped me a lot. And I sometimes look at my story and I go, well, why does anyone want to hear this? But you do, and you have to. And I have no choice but to tell it because I'm alive. And they helped me get through court with the counseling, and their endless support, Marilyn's office and Empower House. We went to trial in 2005, and Eric Olson and Michael Hardiman tried the case, and they successfully convicted him of malicious wounding and abduction, and he received 8 years, which was pretty good for a domestic violence case, right? And then after that, he actually pled guilty to the assault and battery on Nolan. So I was happy that he at least admitted that. He fought me in court with the divorce. He tried to tie the divorce and the criminal case together, and kept me tied up in court for years. He filed complaints against his own lawyers, my lawyer. the judges, the sheriff's office, the clerk's office, Commonwealth Attorney's office, and anybody that was sitting around the courtroom that he could get a name of, he would file complaints about. It was a conspiracy to put him away. That's what he thought. And since he kept firing his own attorneys, he became his own attorney. He represented himself, and at that point, he was able to harass me. He could sit there and ask me any question he wanted in court, which is not good. Very hard for me to be in court with him. Because I didn't maintain the protective order while I was in prison, he actually had PIs on us while he was in prison, laying in the woods across the street from the house, because I had to live in the marital house because I couldn't sell it. We were living in the house, and he was trying to take pictures of my son and grandkids. And so he harassed us the whole time. Because I was financially strapped, he left me with $100,000 in debt plus a house that I couldn't move out of. I had to work overtime. I waited tables at night and on the weekends. I received personal loans from friends. I got money from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Fund, and I embarrassingly had to go to the Navy and Marine Corps Relief Society to get money so I wouldn't lose the house. I even took in renters so I wouldn't lose my house or go into bankruptcy. Finally, in 2007, I was granted my first divorce, but he had his attorney fired that day, and if you know anything about the system, an inmate is considered disabled. So he fired his attorney, and he was able to void that divorce because he wasn't represented that day. So I had to wait a whole nother year to get a divorce, but I finally did, but it was only from matrimony, so I was still tied to him financially. And he served his sentence, and the house didn't sell until after he was released in 2011. So he served his whole time, kept me tied up in court. I went to court over 50 times, and then the house finally sold, but I was finally done with him. And although he lives in another state, we still live in fear every day. And every 2 years I return to court to get another so-called permanent protective order. It's not permanent, it's only 2 years. And Eric and I are working to try to change that. A permanent protective order is actually permanent with no expiration date. I don't like to come back to court every 2 years. I know they like to see me, but, and I know, they'll miss me, but I don't think I should have to do that. His order, his sentencing is that he has no contact with us, and we rate a true permanent protective order. And so this is my domestic violence story, but I want you to know something, that I'm only 1 in 4. Every 1 in 4 women is in a situation like mine, and a lot of them end up worse. And that hurts me. I mean, I'm glad to be alive, and I know that all these people here that Eric talked about that help women like me and worse, they do it every day, and I can't thank them enough. And so as I started out as a victim in this, I like to call myself a survivor. And I've told this story before from Powerhouse, and but tonight is different for me because I have the opportunity to say thank you to people that I haven't been able to say thank you to.